and welcome back to the show. For the next couple of months, I will be using this platform to allow viewers to get to know and interact with our 2020 political candidates, as well as discussing the social issue, the current social issue. In order for us to make the change and to be the change in this world, we have to be educated and politically active. On the Hagir show, we are trying to do our part of raising awareness. And today we have with us Dr. Matt, like you wanted us to call him. And hello and welcome and thank you for joining us today. Can you please introduce yourself and let viewer know a little bit about you?
Yes. Hello, Hagir. Thank you for having me on the show. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Matt Duvall, and I am running for the 102nd PA State House District, which comprises part of Lebanon County, a good part of Lebanon County.
Mhm.
And basically, a little bit of background about me. I've lived here now for 14 years here in Lebanon County. I moved here to marry my wife, Natalie, and we moved to Annville 13 years ago and have lived here for 13 years. We have three kids who are 8, 6, and then the youngest one will be turning 4 later this month. So, I like to mention my family. That's one of the main reasons that I decided to run for this spot was because it looked like back in January that nobody was going to run as a Democratic candidate for this seat.
Mhm.
And I think part of what we need to do, as we were talking about being politically active, is to run candidates for every spot on the ballot. Here in Lebanon County, we have a little bit of an uphill battle because the registration is about 60% Republican, 30% Democrat, and then 10% other or independent. And sometimes it can be discouraging to see that even those Democrats who are registered don't always turn out. But I think part of that is us as the Democratic Party of Lebanon County running quality candidates for all the spots, so that people have a reason to show up. And I also think some of the things that we're fighting for and that we're arguing for will reach across party lines. So I think it is possible to get Republicans and independents to vote for us if we can get our message out. So that's one of the reasons why I like to do shows like this, because obviously the biggest challenge to me is this being the first time I'm running at this level is that not a lot of people know who I am yet. So getting people aware of me and my campaign is a big push. And I think, one of the ways we're trying to do that is through grassroots. So hopefully, somebody who sees this might tell 3 of their friends. If those 3
Mhm.
friends tell 3 more, I think we stand a strong chance here. A little bit of my professional background. I was in the information technology field as a computer programmer for a number of years. I left that to teach high school, and I taught high school for 5 years before returning to Drexel University for my PhD. And I went to Drexel from 2013 to 2017. I got my PhD in educational leadership and learning technologies, and my focus was on STEM education. Since then, I've been kind of combining that technology background and the education background. I did a postdoc where we worked with middle school kids from Philadelphia to get them interested in computer programming by doing game design. We had a really cool project where these four groups of middle school kids designed video games that they played on the Sierra Center, which is a skyscraper in downtown Philly, right by the train station, and
Mhm.
that was the display for their video games. So that was really a really cool project and a lot of fun to work on. And I'm currently an instructional designer for an organization that provides services to individuals with moderate to severe autism from early childhood all the way through adulthood, including a school and other, a community center. And we do, we work with making sure that those folks can live their best lives as well. And, all those things are part of who I am. And so, you can imagine one of the things I'm really interested in, one of the reasons I'm running is for, to really get education, high quality public education, um, including pre-K, including, post K through 12 college and career training options and workforce retraining. And, obviously also the technology infrastructure in Pennsylvania, getting that up to par here in Lebanon County. Um, in some places you have one option if you want broadband internet. In some places you don't have any options. I think, those are things we can work on. So that's a little background. I'm sure we'll get into more details about some of those as we talk.
Definitely, definitely. This is a very, to me, it's a very inspiring and unique resume. Like to know your background, it assures me as someone who live in the area. I don't live in Lebanon, but I have family and friend live there, and it assures me that we will be in a good hand of someone who does really truly care about education, about making a difference, and someone who is well educated himself. I was reading about you, and I shared that with our listeners. You can go to Matt's website. I will share that also to learn more about him. But there are so many important issues that your campaign is focusing on. And, I'm sure you get that a lot. Uh, just talk to us about why this is important to you. Let's start with the first issue, like the education. And you just mentioned a little bit about that. But why those issues are the main focus for your campaign?
Yeah, and that's a good question. And I think, you know, the way I think about the world is, both in terms of a community that we are, whether by choice or by circumstance. We're all part of these various communities, but within
Mhm.
those communities we have individuals. And I think you can judge how well a community is doing by looking at how well the wealthiest individuals are doing, but I don't think that's a fair measure. I think you have to look at how well, the people who don't have the power and the prestige of the people at the top, how well are those people doing? And I
Yeah,
think that's how you really measure how the community is performing, because you want to be, offering the most support to those who most need it. And I think, something like education, I mean, quality public education both helps the individuals who are receiving it, but also helps the community.
yeah.
And I think, we see in Pennsylvania the so-called brain drain where, students graduate from high school, they go away to college, and then they don't come back because there's not opportunities here for them to come back. And part of that is because, we don't have some of those public education options.
Hmm.
Um, Something like, pre-K is, I think we need to have more options that are public and that are funded for people who may have trouble affording it. So a way for them to take advantage of pre-K programs, so that both so that their children, are being educated at the same level as the other kids, but also, as a parent who has kids in childcare myself,
Hmm.
childcare is such an expensive thing for any family to deal with.
Sure is.
And right, and any parent knows that. And intellectually I kind of knew it, but my wife and I both work, and so um, it was, yeah, I mean, we would grumble like, oh, we're paying so much, but the pandemic really brought to light when we were both home and the kids were home and we
Yeah,
didn't have to pay the childcare anymore. I mean, it was amazing how much extra income we had, and it made me really think about the folks who, can't afford that most basic thing and have to make that decision. Like, do I go to work and end up making, pennies basically
yeah,
because I also have to pay for childcare, versus, there should be some option where they could get tax credits or they could get, a reduced rate with the government subsidizing some of that childcare, because those people want to work, and I think we want people to work.
Yeah.
And we don't want them to have to decide between having a safe place for my kids to be and going to work. So I think like those that's an example of education where we might not typically think of because it's not really K through 12, but those early childhood options have a real impact both on the families and their ability to earn a living and also on the children. And then obviously in the K through 12 setting, I see a lot of disrespect, I think, for teachers.
Mhm.
There's a lot of misconceptions about how easy of a job it is. You work 7 to 3
Yeah.
and you get your summers off. And I'll admit that when I started teaching high school, I had some of those ideas like, hey, this is going to be, easy street. I've got it made now. And then I started working and it was like, oh, yeah, the kids are there 7 to 3, except for when there's tutoring or other after school activities and they're actually there till 5 or whatever. But then I still have to, plan my lessons for tomorrow and grade all those papers and do all those things. I can't just take a day off. If I'm going to take a day off, I have to plan that day off because someone's going to have to teach the kids. And it was a real eye opener for me that was probably some of the hardest work I ever did in my life. So I also know from those experiences, we expect a lot of our teachers in terms of their education and qualifications, but we don't want to pay them at the professional level of what we're expecting of them. I mean, you're you're basically going to end up getting a master's degree if you're going to be a teacher because of the requirements for your continuing professional development. And some teachers still will start out at, not even $40,000 a year. Like there should be
It is
our
that.
right, and our teachers should be paid, like professionals, and treated like professionals. There's also, I think, an idea that we can we can create a curriculum, and a curriculum is important. But there's this idea that if we have the curriculum in place, it doesn't matter who's teaching it. Anybody off the street can come in and just teach our children. And in fact, teaching is a very skilled profession. Another thing I learned when I started doing it, I was teaching business classes in high school at a high school, and I had a lot of experience working in a business setting. I was teaching like Excel and PowerPoint and Word, other sort of software applications. I had been writing software applications, like I had a lot of knowledge of that. But when it came time to start teaching kids,
Mhm.
what I quickly discovered was there's a big difference between me knowing how to do it and me being able to teach kids how to do it. Especially, a ninth grader, you go look at Excel and look at all the stuff you can do, and they're like, so what? You know what I mean? At that point, they don't have a lot of context for what they're doing. And so I think, it's important that we recognize the hard work our teachers are doing. And I think, this year, both back in March when the schools closed and now that the schools are reopening, has really highlighted, the important role that teachers play in our communities. And so, those are some of the things that inform my view of, supporting public education, making sure it's funded, making sure it's accessible to everybody. Like I know in our community, our schools made sure that students who needed lunches still continued to get lunches even after the schools were closed down in March. Over the summer, they were providing those opportunities. There's a lot of things that schools do in addition to educating our children that are very important and that I think deserve to be focused on and well funded by the government.
And this is, before we move forward from this point, you brought so many important points that I really want people to focus on, to all our listeners. First of all, today's Labor Day. So thank you to all the hardworking professionals out there who are overworked and underpaid. And one of them is the teachers. And I just want people to think about this. Teachers are the ones who are taking care of our children, of their future. They're the one that's shaping who they're going to be in the future. And why wouldn't you want to have uh, those people who are taking care of the most important part and thing in your life, your kids, to be paid and to be paid well? That's the first question. And then again, to not respect someone who is doing such an amazing job. I'm glad you brought, that people think teaching is an easy job. I work at daycare. It's not the same before. Like in 2001, I worked there, and I felt the same thing. And I did teach for a little bit. And people think that you truly stay home and twirl your fingers and do nothing. They're not thinking that you have to prepare the lessons for tomorrow. You have to open the classroom, you have to close the classroom, you have to clean it, you have to mentally get ready for what you're going to do with the kids. There's a lot goes into teachers and teaching, and there's a lot that goes into their summer. They have to
Right.
take classes, and I'm sure you know that. And on top of that, um, having to uh, uh, like take care of someone else's children and becoming your responsibility. You have to have ethics. And like you said, just like nurses, I'm a nurse, for example, you're expected to know more than anybody else. You're expected to receive higher education, but at the same time, you are not valued as any other profession. And that's something we truly all need to think about and try to fix that problem. And part of our educational system, we have areas that are considered disadvantaged. And we are expecting those same people who are not receiving the same education as others to become valuable member of our society. And it's not a fair thing. So what will be your solution to that? Before we move on from the education, I know we can sit here and talk about one topic forever, but I would like for people to know other issues that you are passionate about.
Right.
What would be the solution you think for um, having fair educational system for all our children, and the same for the teachers?
Right. Yeah, and I mean, I think that's an issue, right? The equitable funding of schools.
Mhm.
And a lot of people, focus on the local school property taxes, and they want to talk about elimination of those. And I understand that. I mean, nobody likes to get that tax bill and have to pay it. But I would say that, I don't know that eliminating local property taxes is going to be feasible, especially with the legislation as it is now, the legislature as it is now. I think it definitely is valid to think about ways to reduce that, and the way you reduce that is by the state paying more per student to the schools. I think the best plans that I've seen to do that talk about dividing income so that you would tax wages and interest at a rate that's actually a little bit lower than what the current personal income tax rate is, and tax
Mhm.
all other classes of income at a higher rate, because those other classes of income are things like capital gains and things like that, and that shifts the burden from the poorest folks to the wealthiest folks, because they can absorb that better. Um, and I think that's a way to approach it, where then those school districts where they're not getting a lot of money from the local property tax base, if we could increase the funding from the state, that obviously helps those schools, and it sort of raises the bar of education for all of our schools, and not just you know back to the supporting the districts that are the most well off, but actually helping those who are not going to get that big property tax boost from their local property taxes, because they're in an area where there's just not that infrastructure. So I think that would be the approach that I would advocate for once I hopefully get to Harrisburg.
Perfect, perfect. That's a perfect. I want to shout out to Christopher McCabe. He is a fighter out there, and is a very good person. I was hoping that he would be able to listen from the beginning, but Chris, you're not late. You can come listen now and also visit Matt. He is someone you truly need to know about and support. Chris is a good one to have by your side all the time. But I mean, this is raising the wages, and this is all important things people might not think about. And like I mentioned to you earlier, uh, your office is, to me, is just as important as the president's office. A lot of people don't look at it this way. Yes, the presidential election is very important, and we do want you to vote, but we also want you to learn about your local officials, just like Matt. Learn about what they can do. And if you don't mind explaining to people what would your office do and why is it important for people to vote local, starting, like someone said before, to ensure that you have a sturdy, strong house, you have to really focus on the foundation. And your office, just like the other candidate we brought on the show, their role is very vital, and they're the foundation of everything happening. So, do you mind explaining that to everyone now?
Sure, yeah, and I think we had talked a little bit before the show started, but you had mentioned, and I definitely had this experience as a younger person where I would show up at the polls on election day and I would vote, especially if it was a presidential election. But I didn't often do a lot of research into the local candidates. I didn't really think a lot about who I was voting for there. And as I've gotten older, and then I would say, especially since 2016, I started to realize that, hey, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that goes on nationally, but that all starts here. I mean,
Yeah.
that all starts in our communities around us, and I think it funnels up. Often we think about it being more of a top down structure, but I don't. I think in reality, it actually will movements that become national movements start in some way on a local level, and so I think when we think about our local communities, I mean, obviously, a state legislator is advocating specifically for his district or her district in the state, but also, advocating for legislation that's going to affect the entire state. So, the people we get into these offices are important both to us very at a very micro level in our own community, but also at the state level, which then translates into impacting a lot more people than you originally think. But I think, for example, recently Lebanon County had was going to be awarded approximately $13 million in CARES funds from the federal CARES Act, and that was going to be distributed um, to us and then to many other counties. Obviously, we're also getting funds. Our county commissioners, two of them, voted to raise or to reopen the county before the approval by the State Department of Health. And when they were talking about doing this, the governor said, if you do that, you're not going to get the funding from the CARES Act.
Mhm.
Our all of our local state representatives, our senator, our DA in the county all supported this move. So they did it. There was one vote against, which was our Democratic commissioner, Joellen Litz, and then the governor withheld the funds as he had said he would do. All right, and I know there's debate. Was he doing gamesmanship? Were they? But the ultimate result of all of this, regardless of where you want to put the blame, is that basically $2.8 million of that now has to go toward a advertising campaign for masks, which is not I think getting more people aware of the science behind wearing a mask and wearing a mask may be useful. But that was $2.8 million that otherwise would have gone directly to businesses in our community. And by having those folks make that move, ultimately that was what caused that money to be lost, because other counties had said they were going to do this, and when the governor said, if you do, you don't get your money, they decided not to. And even though, they had come out against them, so obviously there was, this sort of bickering back and forth, he didn't withhold the funds from them. So it's directly related to those actions. And I think that's a really concrete example of the importance of your local leadership.
Hmm.
I don't know that I would, in fact, I know, because we're all humans, I know that I'm not going to agree with everything that our governor does, even if it's a Democratic governor and I'm a Democratic
Hmm.
legislator. But I think the way you approach those things is not to just fight back for the point of fighting back, but to come with a solution that gets you to where you want to be, but also, achieves the goals that they have as well. So I think, identifying problems is good and is what we need to do. Working on solutions that satisfy everybody. A lot of times we talk about compromise as being I give something up and you give something up. But there's also this idea of collaboration where we identify the goals we're working towards and we make sure that what we're doing gets us both to those goals that are mutual goals. And then nobody has to give something up. We both get that goal that we want. We might just have to reframe how we go about doing it. And I think, at a, when we look locally, um, even things like that people don't think about, like school boards.
Yeah.
We were just talking about education. We were talking about taxation.
Hmm.
The school boards locally have a big impact on those decisions in your community. And those are folks who work for a living. It's not a paid job. It's folks who work in the community, live in the community, have kids that go to these schools. But it is still important which of those people that are running that you put on that board, because they're going to make those decisions that affect you, you
Yeah.
know, day in and day out a lot more than some of the decisions that happen at the national level. So yeah, I would definitely encourage people to, especially in this age of technology,
Hmm.
look up the people who are on the ballot. Find a website, and if you can't find a website or anything online about what their values are or what positions they're supporting, that tells you something in and of itself. Because I
Yeah.
know as a candidate, I can tell you get inundated with people asking you to fill out surveys and questionnaires, and there's lots of places online where you can find value statements, position statements from people, even if they don't have a website, even if they don't have a Facebook page. And if they didn't take the time to do that, that should tell you something about what they think about the position they're running for.
And what they think about their voters too.
Right.
That's very important to know. Knowledge is power, and I can never say that enough. You have to know. And like you, Matt, said, we are human. We are not going to agree and like everyone. This is just how it is. But there is basics that we all have to agree on. And to me, I always repeat that now it is not Republican against Democrat. It is all of us human against everything that is happening that is wrong with the world. And you have to all agree on certain values, certain ethics, laws, order, regulation. And if we cannot follow this and we allow people to think they're over and on top of our justice system, then there is a problem. There is a foundational problem that we need to correct. I think Christopher is asking a question. Were you able to read this?
Yeah, I can see that. So yeah, it's a good question about infrastructure, upkeep, both in the district and statewide. Um,
He said, what are your thoughts on our infrastructure, not only the existing upkeep, but also the improvement needed in our district and statewide? Um, to our existing infrastructure for the next 10 years and beyond. I'm thinking not only jobs, but commerce improvement, etc. Yeah.
right. Yeah, so I mean, I think there's a few different things that come to mind when you think about infrastructure. So one issue is like the infrastructure of our roads, bridges, especially in Pennsylvania. In our district, there have been a number of improvements, or improvement
Hmm.
projects made to sort of repair some of that driving infrastructure. So like some of the bridges and things. And I think, for the state, I know that's an issue. Um, but I think at the same time, obviously, that is generating jobs for people to go do those things.
Yeah.
So I think, that's one example of an area where we should be sort of focusing on how, because obviously that construction is also very expensive. So, how do we manage that, and how do we prioritize like those most important things? But I can think too, when you bring up commerce, there are things like, obviously right now one of the governor's priorities is the legalization of recreational marijuana, or marijuana for recreational use. Um,
Hmm.
and so that's an example of a new sort of commercial enterprise that would start. I think, generally speaking, I would be in favor of something like that, but I also think there are, important caveats that we need to take into consideration. And there's, I'm going to a meeting in a couple of weeks, presented by one of the local drug rehabilitation and addiction centers, where they're going to talk about sort of the counter arguments to that. And I'm interested to hear what they have to say and what research they present, because I think, we definitely don't want to do something like we did with cigarettes, where we have cartoon characters and we're actually marketing this to kids to try to get people
Yes.
addicted to it early. That's, if that's going to be the end result, then no, we don't want to do it. But I think,
Yeah.
you can address those concerns, but also sort of, generate this for jobs and for revenue. But the other thing to consider there is that uh, you're probably still going to get in trouble if you grow it for yourself in your backyard, right? These are going to be commercial plants that are going to be growing and selling marijuana. So we
The
want to make
license,
sure,
etc.
right? So we want to make sure that that's done in an equitable way, and that the benefits at the end outweigh, the cost of what we're doing. But I will also say, like, one of my here in Lebanon County, we have a lot of farmland, and so I've been talking to some folks who are, in agriculture, and Pennsylvania has been doing some testing with industrial hemp, which is,
Yeah.
similar to marijuana, but there's regulations on how you grow it so that it's not something you can smoke or take that as a personal, like, drug.
Mhm.
Um, and what a lot of people do with that is it's in, a lot of these CBD infused oils and treatments, so it's sort of, in some ways medicinal. But what I think, one thing we could be looking at in Pennsylvania with that is it's also actually quite useful for making construction materials like bricks. And
Huh?
so, if we would focus on sort of some of those industrial things, that would be, you know, again, one of those sort of 10-year projects like Christopher was talking about, where
Mhm.
you start to scale up this whole industry of, we're growing it. Now we're going to process it into bricks. So we have to, create the centers to do that, and we'll generate jobs, and we'll, get more income from taxes and things like that. And then, could become a source of construction materials for the state and maybe for the country. So, I think some ideas like that just require, some broader thinking beyond just like, what's going to get me elected again in 2 years, to
Mhm.
like, what can I look at that we can start to put in place that's going to help the community and the state, for, an extended period of time.
So, not jumping from this topic, but I want you to be able to talk about the person running against you. I know Lebanon from my, small knowledge about the population. It's the majority, like you said at the beginning, 60% Republican. Um, and the issue now is like all Republican need to know that there is a line, a fine line, that if your party, and even for Democrat, if my party cross that line, I am not going to support it. This is one of the things I want. We have few questions from Republican friends who don't know what to do. They're like, we're just a Republican, but I don't agree with everything going on and happening now. You know, I want you to like answer that question if you can, and let them know what is the one ticket which is gone now, and also why should they vote for you, like everyone here in Lebanon County and in the area surrounding area. What makes you better than your opponent? And when I know you better, but I wanted them to get to know this part and learn why they should switch their vote, even if they're Republican, for the sake of their county and the sake of their country. So, um, if you don't mind answering that. Uh,
Sure. Um, yeah. So I think, first of all, there's a couple of important changes to voting this year that I think are important to note. Which, number one, is the vote by mail without having to provide a reason or an excuse, so no fault vote by mail. And the
mhm,
second one you mentioned is there's no longer a straight party ticket option. So you have to go through and vote for every race individually or skip them. And I would encourage you not to skip a vote. I think, like I said earlier, we have all these resources. So even if you need to get a copy of the ballot, if you're going to vote in person, if you can look at the ballot and spend 15 minutes briefly researching the people on the ballot, that's a more informed decision. And I would suggest that you always try to find out, what the people stand for that you're voting for, and vote for a person. But if you can't, in good conscience, vote for a person, you could always write somebody in.
yeah,
Things like that. But in terms of, here in Lebanon County in the 102, so my opponent is Representative Russ Diamond. He has been in that seat since 2014, I believe. He was, and in the last race in 2018, he ran unopposed. So, like as I said earlier, I didn't want to see that happen again.
yeah,
So I signed up for the spot, mostly to be an option for people to
mhm,
have. But in the meantime, I will say a couple of things have been concerning to me as a constituent in the 102. Um, and the main thing that's been very concerning has been the stance on the epidemic and the response to the epidemic. So Representative Diamond, has made comments comparing kids wearing masks to being child abuse. He's talked about, you know, he's encouraged people without directly saying it to make up medical conditions as a reason why they shouldn't wear a mask while they're out in public. Um, he got national press coverage because when Dr. Levine had released a very heartfelt statement on behalf of the LGBTQ community regarding a lot of the comments she's gotten from people that are unrelated to the job she's doing. He basically plagiarized that letter, although he says it's satire, and just replaced um, transgender with unmasked community and released that. And so people viewed that. The reason why I got national coverage is because people nationally viewed that as being an insult to the trans community.
yeah,
And whether that's how he intended it or not, that is now what the nation thinks about Lebanon County and
mhm,
about our representatives. So those things are concerning to me, and most concerning is the fact that in terms of the coronavirus, that it's mind-boggling to me that this has turned into a partisan issue, because the virus itself, doesn't check your registration status to see if you're Republican or Democrat.
mhm,
And a lot of the arguments are around the number of deaths and how it's 1,000 people a day or 180,000 people is statistically this small number. I mean, some of these arguments are just mind-boggling to me, and also seem to indicate that, like, it's either you die from it or you're perfectly fine, when we know there are people, I just was reading somebody's account today that they've had COVID for 5 months and, are still struggling with the effects of it. And I know that's also not everybody, but, there's a wide range between you're perfectly fine or you die
Yeah.
with a virus that we know from science and we know from looking at other countries. We know from, the knowledge that we have that
In
if
the
people,
US. Mhm.
yeah, that if people would wear masks, if people would socially distance as much as possible and wash their hands, we could get back to a more normal situation, provided we also had adequate testing that was rapid testing, and a plan for quarantining people who are infected and the people they contact. Like the countries that have been successful in resuming an almost normal situation, those are the things they've done. There's science out there, there's experts out there who will tell you these are the things to do. And yet we have, these arguments erupting. And some of these things, my opponent has been saying, don't wear a mask, go out, live your life, reopen the economy, again, preventing it's sort of a false idea that either we're completely shut down or we're completely open. Like there's a, it's not necessarily one or the other. And if we could do these things in the community to get this virus under control, we would be able to do to be more free about how we live our lives. And I think, champion those causes versus a continuous, fight against the governor over the emergency declaration would be much more beneficial both to our community and to the state. And, I'll say that here in Lebanon County now, we are at a place where our positive rates of testing are down around 3%. So that means that we're doing, the right amount of testing here, for at least for the time being. But we need to be aware of like spikes. We need to have plans in place for what we're going to do with that, and also, be able to test and test quickly. I had suggested that one of the things the state could do is identify quarantine centers where, if you're a healthcare worker, for instance, who has, an immunocompromised person that lives with you, you've been exposed and you have to quarantine for 14 days, like where would you go? So I suggested, we could get hotels to offer some quarantine quarters or, colleges, dorms that they're not using over the summer
Yeah.
anyway. We have a National Guard armory here, so like there's options for that. And when I had suggested that, Representative Diamond had learned of that from I'd been doing a text campaign and somebody had asked me what I meant by that, and I explained it to
Mhm.
them. He made a tweet about it, comparing that to concentration camps,
Oh, wow.
which is, again, first of all,
Scary to me to know that there is another leader who, and we have few of them. That's why switching PA to blue, and not just BA, but hopefully the whole 50 state to blue, because we want someone who believes that science is real, someone who's telling the truth. Just like Biden's slogan, truth over lie. Same thing, science over theories that they come up with, I don't know where. But this is alarming to me that someone who is leading their county and leading them towards, basically unsafe. And that just shows the character, not just because of the pandemic, but any other problem that the county might face. What would be your reaction? Are you someone who I can trust? Like I'm talking about your opponent. But from just listening to you this half an hour, and I'm sure all our listeners will get the sense of who you are and with your background as an educator, as someone who has this amount of knowledge. I am sure you are going to make a perfect uh, leader for the county and making decisions that will safely get us there and not just with the pandemic. But like I said, it's just an example. If you can lead us through this, you will definitely lead us through others. This is one of the things that people need to think about. What is your current representative is doing for you and to you, and is it time for a change? And
Right.
then, like Matt just said earlier, learn about the candidate and having someone running unopposed. It is a concern to me. I don't care who you are, and I want to thank you for taking the stand now and running, because this is not a vacation, everyone, you know? Everyone listening here, they might think, okay, yeah, he's running. That's the same what we said about a teacher earlier. When, not if, when Matt wins, this is going to be a job. He's going to be a public servant. He's going to do what right for his county. He's going to be working tirelessly, just like what he's doing now for his campaign. He's going to be doing that to ensure everything is done right for the county. Let's move on to another issue that you are passionate about, and it is it's up to you to choose. I know you have so many issues
Right.
that you are talking about. You can even discuss them in few minutes, and people can go and learn more about your view and what you're gonna do.
Right.
So you can just yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and there are obviously a number of issues, and I think, you know, we could talk for days probably about
Yeah.
everything. Um, I would say one of the things that I'm very um, passionate about, and that would be a high priority for me, is just raising the minimum wage,
Hmm.
which, you know, again, it sometimes is I guess a little distressing to me that that also seems to become a partisan issue, um, when I don't know that it really is at its base a partisan issue. But I think, you know, the pandemic, as we talked about earlier, has highlighted some of these issues and made us more aware, you know, of the so-called um, you know, frontline or essential workers are in some cases some of the lowest paid workers,
Yeah.
and you know they've gotten temporary pay raises, and rightfully so. But you know what happens then when those temporary pay raises run out? Um, you know, I would like to see us raise the minimum wage in Pennsylvania for the first time in 11 years, and I think it feeds into a lot of these other issues that are important to me. And you know, I would say the most common response I get is that the jobs paying the minimum wage are not supposed to be, you know, work uh, jobs for a living, is one of the arguments. And the other argument often is, if we raise the minimum wage, then the prices of everything is going to go up. So, you know, I think in terms of that first argument, regardless of what you think um, a job that you should live off of is, if somebody is working a job and giving an employer 40 hours a week of their life that
Yeah.
they're never going to get back, they
Mhm.
should be able to afford housing and afford food and afford clothing, you know, the necessities of life on that job. And it's not, you know, that they're lazy and should be working 60 or 80 hours a week. If you're working 40 hours a week, you should be making a living wage. So I mean, that's my response to the first argument. And the second argument about prices going up, you know, first of all, I think if we look from 2009 to today, there's no price that hasn't gone up of anything we buy,
Yeah.
even though the minimum wage has stayed the same. So the prices are going to go up whether you raise the minimum wage or not. And in fact, most economic studies have shown that any effect of raising the minimum wage on actual costs of goods is relatively small and also pretty short lived. So, you know, based sometimes for a month or two after it goes into effect, you'll see a slight, like less than 1% increase. So I think basically just raising the minimum wage helps both the workers and also the state, because when you look at every state around us has raised their minimum wage, and you think about people who are looking for jobs, if you live close to another state, why would you take a job here when you can make, you know, more per hour just by driving a few minutes across the state line and working in another state. And I think, then we lose revenue and attractiveness to employers. There's all these things that go into it. So I think, there's a lot of arguments that or values that you might be looking for that raising the minimum wage would help you get to those goals. And to me, it's that first one of if people are working and giving somebody that time of their life that they won't get back, they should be able to make a living off of that if it's a 40-hour-a-week job, or they should be paid fairly if it's a part-time job. So, I think that's one of the things I'm pretty passionate about.
And that's a very important issue. And I think as someone who worked and I was making $6.50 raising kids. So we go back to what you said at the beginning, affording childcare, having to work more hours, which will take you away from your kids. I was forced to take a second job and a third job after that, so I can pay for my house, food, and everything else. And that will take you away from your kids. You won't be able to enjoy them and raise them right and do it. And it's like a ripple effect. So, this is a very important point and issue that we really need to think about. And we have a lot, like the taxation. I am happy paying taxes as a business owner now and as someone who can afford it, because I know it's going towards the right place. So tax us more, tax the people who are making more money, tax them more, and allow other people to be able to live. That's my intake. That's not your words, but I'm sure you're saying something, similar to that. But that's one of the issues. And we have, like, I know we can sit here and talk for a couple hours. We have 10 minutes left in the show. If you don't mind trying to get basically not summarizing, but telling everyone who just joined us, and to everyone who's just coming to the show, when we finish, you'll be able to watch it from the beginning. But to get them to speed, if you can let people know, the main issues that you are passionate about, and why are you running, and also what do you want people to take from listening to you today?
Okay. Yeah. So, I think, we talked about some of the issues and values I have. If people are interested in learning more, if you go to the About Me page on duvallforpa.com, I have some issues listed there. The three main ones we've talked about, I'm very pro-education, pro-public education, including, pre-K, early childhood care, K through 12, obviously, and then after 12th grade, options for vocational and technical training, options for college, options for retraining for people who get into the workforce and then are without jobs and need other skills. I think those are all important things that the government can help in coordination with schools and in coordination with industry to make ways for people to get the education that they need and want, um, with low cost or no cost for them, depending on their circumstances. Along with that, obviously, we just talked about raising the minimum wage, but that goes into my, I really have a place in my heart for working families. When I grew up, my family was poor. My parents worked, 2 or 3 jobs for most of my life, and so I know what it's like to be, working hard and then have people tell you if you don't have money, you're lazy. And looking at somebody who's working 3 or 4 jobs and telling them they're lazy just doesn't resonate with me based on my experiences. So, I think strengthening unions is something that I'm supportive of, that we didn't talk about in depth, but I think those are that's an important aspect of our economy as well. And then obviously I have a background in technology, and so one of the things that's uh, important to me is making sure that Pennsylvania is on the leading edge of the technological infrastructure. So access to broadband internet would be sort of the first step in that. I mean, there's a lot more beyond that, but we
Mhm.
still have rural areas in my district and in the state where you can't even get broadband access. And you think it's not that important, but things like the pandemic have shown if the schools have to close and all of a sudden the option is virtual learning, what do you do if you don't have internet access? If you can be safer by seeing your doctor virtually about a rash or some non-critical issue you're having, but you don't have internet access, what do you do about that? If you're a farmer who wants to get the latest prices for your crops and you're out in rural Pennsylvania and you don't have internet access, like that's a big deal. So I think that to some people they kind of write that off as well. We have cell phones, we have technology, we have other things, but I think it's important that we not just get to the level of everybody else, but I think we should be leaders with technology. And then some of the things I didn't get to touch on, but are on my About Me page, and I'm glad to talk with people in more detail about, are my values around people. So we talked earlier about this being a public service position, and I definitely see it as I'm serving my constituents. So one thing that I always try to do is treat people with respect, even when we disagree. And I won't always. We're never going to agree 100% on everything. We talked about that earlier. As human beings, like that just doesn't happen. But I'm always interested in hearing other perspectives, trying to understand the goals that we have in common and how we can work on those goals. And regardless of whether we end up agreeing or disagreeing, I think civility is important in discussions and especially in our politics today. So civility is important to me. Along with that, I think, we've seen across the country and here in the state issues around equality and equity for Black people, for people of color, for LGBTQ community. Those are all things that I think are important, and I know people sort of they get uncomfortable, and it is an uncomfortable conversation to have. But I think it's an important one to have, that we need to recognize that we are at a place in our country where we can now address these issues and come to a better place for our communities.
Mhm.
And whether here in Anvil, for instance, our police force, I'm very happy with, and I don't have any issues with our police officers here in Anvil. But I think if you look at the justice and legal system across the country, there is definitely a disparity for people who are Black and for people of color versus people who are white. And that's not to say that I hate police, or that I don't want to give any money to police. But I think if we invest in our communities um, and other options for people, so if we invest in these things like education, and
Mhm.
if we have job opportunities for people, and if we have after school programs for kids, if we have social and mental health workers who are responding to issues in their communities,
Mhm.
like those things help the communities and also would help the police, because I know that the police, I'm sure, don't like to have to take on all these other roles either. They don't want to have to be the social worker, the mental health worker. That's not the job they sign up to do,
Yeah.
and they're doing a public service for us. So let them do their job, and put other people in place to do, the jobs that will help the whole community come together. And I think, when we paint these things as divisive, I just don't get that. And this is sometimes in our political discourse, that if you're a Democrat, you get labeled as a radical leftist, and then that's like the end of the conversation. But I live here in the community. People can talk to me. People can see what I do here, um, if I'm radical, I mean, maybe I am. I don't know. Maybe I just am not self-aware enough to realize it. But I feel like some of these things are just basic human decency and courtesy, right? To recognize that every human being has intrinsic value and should be treated with respect. Um, and to me, like I think that is the core value of why I'm running because, you know, whether we agree or disagree, if you're in my district, I'm still going to represent you. I'm still going to listen to your concerns, and I'm going to do my best within my guiding principles to get to a place that what we're doing in Harrisburg helps you and the community and helps us all to achieve our goals.
And I think that makes a huge difference when the last line you said, and I want everyone to hear it again, whether he disagree or agrees with you, he's still going to do his job. And that's what politics and should be, and what having a representative who you can actually trust mean. It doesn't matter if, and unlike you said, people think about Republican, they think right, like, and think about Democrat and say radical right, radical left. It doesn't have to be this way. And again, I'm going to repeat one more thing. Reforming the police or saying defunding the police, it might sound as divisive and it might sound bad, but if you truly understand the meaning, which mean just having more resources towards our social workers, mental health workers, people who actually can come in and help the person who needed help. Militarization, the police is not an answer. Having uh, violence towards someone who is mentally disturbed or someone who is just simply refusing to, it shouldn't be a death sentence, and that's what we're trying to say. And thank you for bringing that up, Matt, and thank you for fighting for equality for all, because we do have a problem. We do have a systemic racism, and a lot of people deny that. And a lot of the officials that I'm really hoping that I won't hear their names again, and they will go after November, who doesn't believe there is an issue. Just the same denial for global warming science. Denying an issue does not mean the issue does not exist. It just means we're not gonna shed light. We're not gonna fix it. But thank you for fighting, and thank you for bringing that subject right there. And Chris says, thank you. We'll be sharing your page. Yes, please do. And to all our listeners, this is just part. And I am so sorry that 1 hour is not enough with you, Matt, because you have a lot to offer. And I urge everyone to follow Matt and go listen to him and hear what he has to say. And last thing that we're going to say before we go, with this election, it is not like before. Not a lot of people are able to go knock on doors and campaign the traditional way. So donation, you can go to his to his page, and contribute to his campaign. You can volunteer. What are the ways that people can do to help you, Matt?
Yeah, so on DuvallForPA.com, we have a donation link. So obviously, that's always useful. I know we're in the middle of a pandemic, and so for some folks, resources are tight in terms of money. We're always looking for volunteers to share social media campaigns, to write postcards, to do phone banking, text banking. We're doing all of those things. The biggest thing that people can do, especially if they're in the district or know somebody in my district, is just to tell them to visit my webpage to learn more about me, because the number one thing that I don't have right now is a lot of name recognition as a first time sort of candidate at this level. So definitely, tell your friends. Sharing things on social media is also a way to do that, but I think sometimes a personal, text or phone call just to your three closest friends or enemies, if you don't like me, tell them about me. But just tell people to go check me out.
Not for
And
negative publicity.
that's right. Because that's the main thing I think that I'm fighting against. I really believe that the people of Lebanon County, if they know about me and they know the values that I stand for, and if they will talk to me, they'll see that I'm the best choice for November.
Yes, you are. And one candidate before, I think Lindsay Drew, she said, not because you recognize that name, and we did talk about the opponents, and some people have the name recognition, but please, when you go vote, don't just vote, down straight. There is no straight ticket, one ticket this time. You can actually learn about the candidates and try to choose the right one. That's the first thing. Second thing, if you hear a name and you don't know about them, don't just vote because, oh, I heard that name. Because there is such a thing as negative publicity. You might have heard that person, like Lindsay said, uh, doing something bad. And just like Matt's opponent saying controversial things and putting Lebanon into national news for no good reason. So learn about the candidates. Remember that when you pull this curtain, no one is going to know who you voted for. Vote your conscience, vote your values, your ethics, and vote for a change. Learn about the candidate, get to know them, and choose wisely. That will be my advice. Any last words that you want to say to our listeners, Matt, before we close? And I really want to thank you and tell you need to know this is an honor to me to have you here. And hopefully people will get to know your name and know the good person you are, and that you are going to bring a good change to Lebanon County. And just last words, and we will let you go. I know you're a busy man.
Well, I definitely appreciate it, and I appreciate you having me on the show and giving me this opportunity to get my platform out to more people. My final, I guess, message to everybody watching is just get informed about your options on the ballot, and definitely, if nothing else, make sure you vote, because voting is our most basic um, duty, but also right as citizens in the United States, and we want to make sure we exercise that right.
Thank you very much. And there is a comment here from Mina. I love that comment. Thank you very much for watching. And we are 100% behind you. And I like that picture. I'm going to steal it from you, Mina, and I'm going to post it for Duvall, for all. And we need a change. And like I said at the beginning, in order for us to make a difference in this world, we have to be the change. And please vote your conscience. This year is very important. Not that every election is not important, but this year you have to vote, like your life depend on it, your kids' life depend on it, your grandkids' life depend on it, because it truly does. Our life depend on your vote this year, so vote right. Thank you again, Matt. It was a pleasure and an honor to have you. I wish you good luck, and please keep up and let us know what we can do to help you. And for all of our listeners, please go to Matt's website and go to his page. I will post every information that you need. Volunteer, donate, words of mouth, call your friends, your family, anyone that you know in Lebanon, and get Duvall elected this year. Thank you very much, everyone. And thank you again, Matt. Have a good evening.
Thanks, you too.